Are recording. Welcome back, or welcome for the first time to another impactful webinar. I'm just starting off with the camera so that you could see me and I can see you. I'm sorry, you can see me, and puts a little bit more of a face to a voice. I will be cutting the camera soon, but I thought before we begin, if you are new or if you are returning, if you could kindly just write new and where you are from, or return and where you are from. And then I have a follow-up question for you when we are done with that. Just want to get everybody to see one another. Once again, please reply to all panelists and attendees. Rochester, San Francisco, New Jersey. Okay, welcome back. New York, excellent. Keep them coming. Danville, California. The Bronx. That's where I was born, actually, or was raised as a youngster. Rochester, New York, Nigeria. Oh, awesome. Okay, New Jersey, Greenville, New York. Okay, New Jersey, Sacramento. Lots of East Coast and West Coast. Anyone in between? Okay, would love to see anyone and everyone. Please do let us know that you are here, and sorry for my roaming camera. It has a mind of its own. Let's see if I could stabilize this thing for just a couple of minutes. All right, so while you are responding, could you also at this point, if you are a returnee, and a number of you indicated that you are, it would be fantastic for me if you could just take a moment and share one thing that you have learned in however many webinars you've attended, one thing that that has stuck with you, maybe that has already made its way into your professional practice. That's what fuels me. And by the way, some of you have been very kind to share some words of inspiration to me through email. Would definitely love to hear what's working for you, get your feedback, and want to keep this conversation going, creating ongoing community. And you know, this has really been a source of inspiration for me during these challenging times. And I'm glad to know that so many of you are feeling similarly. So again, if there's something in particular that you have learned, something that you have gained that you would like to share here, that would be great. I do understand that we're just getting started. Okay, good afternoon, Danielle and Ruth and Richard. I think it's Jonathan, but some people put their last name first. I'm not certain. Either way, a pleasure to have all of you here. I'm going to kill the camera at this point. Okay, Jamie, thank you for sharing importance on PD for reading science for all teachers. Okay, cool. And any other feedback that you want to share is most appreciated. Let me go ahead and remove the camera so we can focus on the screen. Are you able at this point to see the PowerPoint in front of you, multiple intelligences teaching to our students' strengths? While I also read Taniqua's comment. Oh, that disappeared fast. Let's go back to that. Something that stuck with me is starting every meeting with the human connection, giving people time to decompress. Excellent. Connecting with people and breathing through it all. Excellent. So you can see this. You can see it. I'm getting your feedback. This is great. Okay, so we're going to get started now with our formal presentation, and let us jump right in. Actually, for those of you who don't know me, let me do this quickly. I used to be a teacher and a school leader. Now I do executive coaching and organizational consulting, do a lot of work with schools, school leaders, with teachers, professional development, teacher training. And if you haven't been on these calls, hopefully you will get a lot of value today. But if you have been, then you know that we've been sharing quite a bit of value on many, many related topics, and certainly something that I look forward to doing continually, not only virtually, but also in person when opportunity presents itself. But in the meantime, we are here together and we are here virtually. We have created a great community, and on top of it, we are growing with each other, supporting one another at a time that is very isolating. And as I often do, I'd like to give us all a blessing that we should continue to join together in good health. We should have opportunity to share inspiration and to make maximal impact. And you guys are teachers. I don't know any profession that makes a bigger impact than you. And so let's get right into it and discuss how we can learn more about supporting our students and the various intelligences, the unique learning styles and all of that that they possess. Okay, so here are our two objectives, and these are the two things that I reserve the right to ask you about at the end of our presentation today. Number one, what are the 8 identified intelligences and their definitions. And number two, to understand how to plan our lessons to tap into these intelligences in a more meaningful manner. So what I'm going to ask you to do right now before we go any further is to think of a lesson or a portion of a lesson and think of the way that you typically teach it and try to imagine the kind of learners that would benefit the most from the way that you currently teach it. And let's think about, as we unpack different modalities and different intelligences and strategies for all of them, how we can repurpose, repackage, or just add variety to the way that we're presently doing it so that we can benefit those students who learn differently. That's in effect what we want to accomplish. So knowing that from the beginning and having something specific to focus on, I believe will help us. So if you want to write down in the chat now what it is that you are thinking about, what kind of lesson, if it's a math lesson, a science lesson, a different kind of lesson, right? What subsection area are you focusing on, and what kind of learner do you think presently benefits from it? What kind of learner would you like to reach? All of these things, I think, are questions to consider, and I would love to see your responses already now to allow me to hopefully customize my comments moving forward to best meet your needs. Okay, so I'm looking to the chat as I continue to look at the PowerPoint, and this is how we will know that we have met our objectives. If, number one, we can list these 8 identified intelligences and their definitions, and number two, if we can identify at least one meaningful application per intelligence. Okay, so learning with special needs in the remote learning platform. So the question is, how can we reach them better or differently, I suppose? Okay, kinesthetic learners, right? I'm looking to see what kind of content you're looking to customize, so to speak, for these kinds of learners. So feel free to share that as well. All right, let's move on here. So we've done this once or twice before. Let's take a look at it again. What I'd love to know is, what do you already know? And then, of course, we'll talk about what you want to learn, as well as maybe later on, that'll be the last thing, what you actually learned. So for those of you not familiar, this is called a KWL. It's a graphic organizer. It's also a wonderful pre-instructional tool for differentiation. For now, I'd like for you to please write something that you already know about the topic of multiple intelligences so that I am not redundant in what I share today. Okay, so let's do that first, and then when we're done, I'm going to ask you to tell me what you came on this call to learn. What are you interested in adding to your toolkit that you don't already have? But again, for now, what do you already know? Your answers need not be overly involved or complicated, that there are 8. Excellent. Each child learns differently. That's great. Lots of responses there. Okay, children learn in their own ways. Multiple learners, multiple learning styles. We can develop in each area instead of believing we're born with certain strengths. That's true. That's a growth mindset kind of tied in together. Great thought, Kelly, on that one. Okay, learn different ways, multiple ways to learn. All right, fantastic. So keep those coming. I'm going to move the conversation to the next column here. Now, so let's wrap these up, but at the same time, what I'm going to ask, so that I know that we are clearly distinguishing between the two, because sometimes there's a delay in when you respond and when I see it. Please put the letter W with a colon, so that indicates what you want to learn, and then offer your response. In the meantime, I'm going to read through the rest of them. Children don't learn at the same pace. That is true. This is not really our focus, Richard. That's more of a differentiation focus, but having different modalities in your mind as you're teaching will help. So again, we want to know what you are looking to learn. Okay, how do I reach multiple learners remotely? Okay, you hit right on it. That's our challenge for sure. How to support them as we embark on emergency remote learning. Okay, enable them to learn particular. How to use this for a lesson. How do I teach with it? Okay, great. Any other thoughts here? Again, the W in front tells me what you want to learn. How does culture affect learning style? Interesting. Would you like to elaborate, Richard? Okay, how to approach them more in reading and how do I teach it? Okay, clarify what you mean, Therese, when you say approach them more, please. Okay, how does help you plan lessons? All right, trying to keep up with all of this stuff. All right, okay. So I'm going to continue, but there's so much more here. Matching approach to style. All right, so is that a response to something else? I'm not sure. All right, either way, I apologize if I didn't get to everybody. I know I didn't, but I tried. And let's keep them coming. By the way, some of you are still responding to only all panelists. Please adjust your chat feature to read all panelists and attendees so everybody else can see what you are writing. Okay, now, normally I would do this with more than one person. You don't have a partner, so we're just gonna be everybody's partner here. I'm not sure we're gonna go through a lengthy piece on this because time is not on our side, but I'm just curious to know, when we talk about intelligent and smart, do you see them as same or different? And if you see them as different, how would you distinguish between them? You can write an I for intelligent and S for smart if you want to. Is there a difference? And if so, what is that difference? Remember, we're using the term multiple intelligences, but as you might have seen, I'm going to quickly go there for just a moment. You'll notice that, for example, here on the cover, this linguistic bottom right, I would say about, between 3 and 430 is both linguistic and word smart, and logical mathematical is logic smart. So on one hand, the terms seem to be used interchangeably. On the other hand, my question to you is, do you feel that they really are the same? And if not, how do you think that they are different? Let's take a moment to ponder the question and share some responses. As a reminder, please do respond to all panelists and attendees. So Jamie says, intelligence is your gift or talent. It's not necessarily learned. Okay, intelligence is cognitive abilities, whereas smart is things we develop. Book versus not book learning. Interesting. So a lot of interesting starting points here for our conversation. Not necessarily right or wrong, but definitely ways to think about it. Okay, Tiffany sees a difference. Intelligence is knowledge to me. To be smart is the ability to problem solve. Okay. So some of you seem to be thinking about it as your God's gift, if you will, versus what you do with it. Applied learning versus what we might call book learning or school learning. Nature versus nurture. I'm seeing like all sorts of variations. And again, please do reply to all attendees as well as all panelists. Okay, so here are some dictionary definitions here that may be useful for us to consider. This is a very text-based or text-heavy slide. There'll be very few of these, but I did want you to see the full definition. So the way that dictionaries have defined it, at least some that I've used, are for intelligence, it's the ability to learn and the ability to apply, where smart is more having or showing quick intelligence, clever or witty. Okay, so interestingly here, the way we're defining intelligence is along the lines of some of you, I think, where you talked about application, to learn and to understand and then apply it to situations. So these are interesting thoughts. It's not a major difference whether we define it one way or the other, but I think what we need to understand is that when we define a child or we call a child smart, right? You're so smart, which by the way, if you were not part of our presentation on growth mindset, that term is to be avoided. We should focus instead on on the process, the effort, things like that that the student used in order to achieve their goal. But generally speaking, when we think about SMART, usually it's about intrinsic ability, quick intelligence, whereas intelligence itself is more about application. So when we think about multiple intelligences, it's what we're doing is we're trying to create an environment in which students are able to use their gifts as well as make applications and then create new learnings, new outcomes, etc. So it's sort of like a blend of the two ideas together. And maybe that was a bit academic, but I think it's useful as we consider moving forward, how it is that we're defining our terms and how we're going to be applying them. Okay, so the last question for now, and then we're going to jump into a lot of the technical understanding of the different intelligences. What contributes to you feeling intelligent or unintelligent? Think of a moment when you felt really smart. Think of moments where you have felt the opposite. What would you say is the underlying factor primarily in determining when you personally felt intelligent, not how you were defined by others, but how you personally felt versus how you felt when you were feeling unintelligent? So Bob talked about the negative, lack of knowledge. So would intelligent then be possessing the knowledge? Okay, success is a positive environment or support from Heather. Background knowledge. Okay, thank you, Bob. So when we feel like we have proper background, that makes us feel smarter. Okay. So I don't know which is the first name and the last name here. If it's Anyalwechi, if I didn't pronounce it right, I do apologize. When you can make things, okay. Practice knowledge or lack of practice knowledge, having an understanding. It sounds like a lot of preparation. So in other words, when we feel prepared through knowledge, through practice, that's when we feel intelligent. And when we lack that, when we don't have context, when we don't have understanding, when we're feeling like out of our element, then we feel unintelligent. Isn't that interesting? Would anyone now make an application to your students? How can this alone give us a different perspective in how we talk with our students, how we support our students, how we encourage them? Because generally speaking, if this is how we feel, we have to assume our students probably feel similarly. So for example, if a student says, I'm dumb, or I don't know how to do this, how could we respond in a way that reorients their thinking? Okay, Richard, that's a very nice insight here. Success in doing. That makes me feel intelligent versus the opposite, relating to them. So I'm not sure what that's a response to. Leanne, if I pronounced that correctly, I think I did. Correct me if I'm wrong. Or I don't know if you'll be able to actually. Okay. Yay. Okay, good. Giving students exposure is so important to their confidence level. That's true. We want to give them exposure. We also want to give them positive talk. We want to give them context. We want to tell them that we struggle sometimes when we don't have background. Thank you, Danielle. We must be careful saying things that make them feel worse. Yes, that's true. And the opposite, I would argue, is also true. Right? We can make them feel better by giving them positive reinforcement, encouraging. Yeah, good stuff. All right. Keep that coming. We're going to transition because I'm looking at the clock. I know we've got a lot to do and not that much time. But I think, again, as we frame our minds around how we learn, and the more that we can break that down for ourselves, the better we can oftentimes do the same for our students. It's about demystifying the learning process, getting them to understand their abilities as well as their challenges. It doesn't necessarily mean that they could do anything they want to any degree of proficiency, but we definitely can help them move the needle and become stronger, more confident, and have a better attitude, which in many cases is a primary driver in their ultimate success. Okay, so I'm going to try to play this for you. I'm going to, let's see here. There's a way to do it. I did it the last time here with success. Bear with me for one moment, sorry. Let me see if I can get back here and do this with the settings. Okay. Just bear with me for one moment. I'm trying to remember how I did this. Nope, that's not what I want. Sorry about that. Okay, bear with me for just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Again, I apologize for the delay here. Switch to phone, computer audio. Let me see if I play it. Let's see what happens.
We need to radically rethink our view.
Okay, I don't know if you were able to hear that. Could you just indicate for a moment if you were? I'm going to play it again. Let me know if you could hear this.
Intelligence. We know three things about intelligence. One, it's diverse. We think about the world in all the ways that we experience it. We think visually, we think in sound, we think kinesthetically. Wonderfully interactive. The brain isn't divided into compartments. In fact, creativity, which I define as the process of having original ideas that have value, more often than not, comes about through the interaction of different disciplinary ways of seeing things. The brain is intensely, by the way, there's a shaft of nerves that joins the two halves of the brain called the corpus callosum. It's thicker in women. Following on from Helen yesterday, I think this is probably why women are better at multitasking. Because you are. Aren't you? There's a raft of research, but I know it from my personal life. If my wife is cooking a meal at home, which is not often, thankfully, but you know, if she's saying, she's good at some things. But if she's cooking, you know, she is dealing with people on the phone, she's talking to the kids, she's painting the ceiling, you know, she's doing open heart surgery over here. If I'm cooking, the door is shut, the kids are out, the phone's on the hook. If she comes in, I get annoyed. I say, Terry, please, I'm trying to fry an egg in here. You know, give me a break. Actually, there was, do you know that old philosophical thing? If a tree falls in a forest and nobody hears it, did it happen? Remember that old chestnut? I saw a great T-shirt really recently which said, if a man speaks his mind in a forest and no woman hears him, is he still wrong? And the third thing about intelligence is it's distinct. I'm doing a new book at the moment called Epiphany, which is based on a series of interviews with people about how they discovered their talent. I'm fascinated about how people got to be there. It's really prompted by a conversation I had with a wonderful woman who most people have never heard of. She's called Gillian Lynn. Have you heard of her? Some have. She's a choreographer and everybody knows her work. She did Cats and Phantom of the Opera. She's wonderful. I used to be on the board of the Royal Ballet in England, as you can see. And anyway, Gillian and I had lunch one day. I said, how'd you get to be a dancer? And she said it was interesting. When she was at school, she was really hopeless. And the school in the 30s wrote to her parents and said, we think Gillian has a learning disorder. You couldn't concentrate, she was fidgeting. I think now they'd say she had ADHD. Wouldn't you? But this was the 1930s and ADHD hadn't been invented, you know, at this point, so it wasn't an available condition. You know, people weren't aware they could have that. Anyway, she went to see this specialist. So this oak panelled room, and she was there with her mother, and she was led and sat on this chair at the end, and she sat on her hands for 20 minutes while this man talked to her mother about all the problems Gillian was having at school. And at the end of it, because she was disturbing people, their homework was always late and so on, little kid of 8, in the end, the doctor went and sat next to Gillian and said, Gillian, I've listened to all these things that your mother's told me. I need to speak to her privately. So she said, he said, wait here, we'll be back, we won't be very long. And they went and left her. But as they went out the room, he turned on the radio that was sitting on his desk. And when they got out the room, he said to her mother, just stand and watch her. And the minute they left the room, she said she was on her feet, moving to the music. And they watched for a few minutes, and he turned to her mother, and he said, you know, Mrs. Lynn, Gillian isn't sick, She's a dancer. Take her to a dance school. I said, what happened? Said she did. I can't tell you how wonderful it was. We walked in this room and it was full of people like me. People who couldn't sit still. People who had to move to think. Who had to move to think. They did ballet, they did tap, they did jazz, they did modern, they did contemporary. She was eventually auditioned for the Royal Ballet School. She became a soloist. She had a wonderful career at the Royal Ballet. She eventually graduated from the Royal Ballet School, found her own company, the Gillian Dance Company, met Andrew Lloyd Webber. She's been responsible for some of the most successful musical theatre productions in history. She's given pleasure to millions, and she's a multi-millionaire. Somebody else might have put her on medication and told her to calm down.
Okay, so just wanted to make sure that number one, you were able to hear it, and number two, that you're able to hear me at this point. And in addition to replying yes, hopefully to both, if you could please share something meaningful that you just learned from this video. Something that you learned, an insight, inspiration. Why do you feel that this was useful, a good use of our time? Hopefully you do, and congruent with what we're talking about. Thank you, Desireen. Intelligence is distinct, that is true. Each of us have a different combination of intelligence, approach work differently, multiple ways of learning and expression, diverse, excellent. Okay, keep those responses coming. All of those are true. And this is, by the way, Sir Ken Robinson. If you're not familiar, he has delivered a number of the most widely watched TED Talks in the field of education and perhaps elsewhere as well. Very insightful, witty, as you probably picked up on, and a lot of good content there. So we learn in different ways. Parents saw something as a weakness, or the school did, right? Yeah, but ultimately it was a strength. All right, different learning types, yeah. In fact, so often, by the way, and it's really a different conversation, but it does connect with ours. The fact that so much of what we consider to be success in school does not translate to life beyond school, right? Because oftentimes the kids that are not the valedictorians or the equivalent are the ones who really, really do well in business or in life outside of school, because they tap into different skills, different abilities. And sometimes the most academic students have a hard time translating that into the world at large. So there's a lot here to discuss and unpack. But for our purposes right now, I would like to move into our first objective for today. It took us a while, but here we are, okay? And that is, there are different types of intelligences. You are welcome, by the way, if you think you know your own learning style, you are welcome to write it in the chat. You could just write the first word, picture, number, people, nature, that kind of thing. Okay, yes, you are Therese, and you are correct. We do have to take time to learn, understand our students. I'm actually going to share this. I was going to share this later with you, but I'm going to share it with you now, even if you would like to take a quick look at it. A resource that could be useful to you for yourself as well as for your students. I would not encourage you to go ahead and take it now, but I do think it's important for you to know your own, let alone what your students are capable of doing, because that will influence a lot of how we teach as well as how we prepare lessons for our students. Okay, Lizeth, that's, I hope that I pronounced that correctly. Self and vision, so a self-learner and a visual learner. Okay, Richard's a word-based learner. Number learner, I saw an answer earlier. Kinesthetic, thank you, Eileen and Tiffany for the picture, and Leanne, thank you all for responding. We may not know, and by the way, we don't only have one intelligence. We may have a priority or a preference, but we can learn all 8 ways. Some of us have, again, greater affinity towards and interest in certain learning styles and greater strengths. Let's unpack that just a little bit more and focus on the ones that all of our students have minimally to a large degree. So in other words, all of us on some level typically have the VARK, which is V-A-R-K, visual, oral, spelled A-U-R-A-L, read, write, and kinesthetic. If we hit on those 4, we will benefit most of our students most of the time. Okay, so let's take a look at them. But before we do, here are some more applications of each of the ones we saw on the previous slide. They're not in the same order, I don't think. So you see the intelligence, and then you see the kinds of activities underneath them, which help to better explain what these intelligences are and how they work, and the kind of activities we could be thinking about that would benefit those respective students. So some of the intelligences are more how we process information. Others might be how we utilize our bodies or our relationships to extrapolate the information or to deepen it. So kinesthetic through movement, interpersonal by talking to somebody else. Intrapersonal is more about me thinking about it internally, which usually aligns with the introvert. Whereas interpersonal, which is suffering quite a bit nowadays because we are virtual and remote in our learning, that's between other people. The one that is the most recent addition and perhaps has the least academic application, though not necessarily, is the naturalist, seeing patterns in nature. The more that we can incorporate nature in our teaching, the better. That could be through writing, that could be through conversation, it can be through field trips and external activities, it could be using mathematical and some of the other types of intelligences or disciplines through the lens of nature and science. Okay, so when we speak, for example, and the students are listening to us, which intelligence would that be? So generally speaking, that would be verbal linguistic, although the auditory piece is not expressed openly here. Obviously, that is something that we have to factor in as well. Some students learn well when they hear it. Some students do well when they see it. Some students do better when they touch it or move with it or things like this. Okay? The way to remember it is subliminal. I took out all the verbs and tried to make it work. Subliminal. This is not a particular order. This is just a way that I made it work for me. So subliminal, the S is for spatial, which is together with visual, the B for bodily kinesthetic, the L for logical, mathematical, the I for interpersonal. Actually, there are a couple of vowels here. The M for musical rhythmic, which is the intelligence in that Ken Robinson was talking about. Intrapersonal is where we think about it more for ourselves, naturalist, and then linguistic, which is also auditory and verbal. So actually in this one, auditory is incorporated together with verbal linguistic. All right, so there's a lot here that we need to unpack. By the way, as you could probably imagine, the ones that we do the best, I would say the best work with would be auditory, verbal, linguistic, right? We talk a lot. We listen to our students. There's a lot of verbal communication going on. To a lesser degree, depending on what we teach, we may do some logical, mathematical. And of course, if we're using images, we do visual and spatial. The other ones, not necessarily as much. Not necessarily as much. So we do want to be thinking about how can we get our students moving more? How can we incorporate song and rhythm and rapping and things like this, rhyming, as ways to help students remember. Thank you for the correction on the spelling there, Kate. That probably is a typo. Okay, I will have to fix that if that is the case. So interpersonal, how do we get our students talking more? Intrapersonal, how do we get our students to think personally to themselves, reflect more as an individual? And then we talked already about naturalists and connecting them more with nature. So if you think, for example, about think, pair, share, which is something we have used sort of in our webinars thus far, the think piece is intrapersonal, the pair component is interpersonal, and the share is both interpersonal as well, and they're all verbal and linguistic. And since there's movement involved, there's also bodily kinesthetic. So I hope that you can see, and if there's a picture involved, there's a visual spatial component. And if it's a picture about nature, then it's naturalist as well. And if it has a logical component to it, so you can see already that you can combine, in theory, the content with the activity and hit multiple intelligences. It's almost like when I do a workout a full body workout, and they talk about how we're hitting all of the muscle groups, right? It's like we left no muscles behind. We're going to hit on all of them. So whether it's lower body, upper body, more cardio, more strength training, you're going to utilize different things. So the more that we can find ways to layer in different intelligences, the deeper that we can go with this. Okay. Now you might say, well, how can I do this remotely? And I'm just going to offer a slight suggestion here right now before we move forward. You could have your students literally grab a squishy doll, you know, some kind of little toy or something, and just move it in their hands as they're learning. You could have them gently pace back and forth. Maybe they're holding a device and they can take a few steps one way or the other. You can encourage them to exercise even between learnings for a moment to kind of, or to breathe. There's some pieces here that are being shared. You might want to add your own ways of incorporating more learning. The interpersonal piece, you could do a whole class chat. Maybe you could have them chat with each other. Maybe you could have them create small meeting groups and do some jigsaw or some other types of cooperative learning, different things we have talked about. All of these ideas will be helpful. So if you're creating a visual with a PowerPoint or something similar, if there's music or rhythm or some kind of beat associated with it, all of these will help them learn it. All of these will help them categorize it, and it will help them to extract it at the right time. The deeper it goes in, and with increased modalities, the deeper it will stay and the easier it'll be for your students to access it on the back end. Remember, we learn through all 5 senses, right? We learn through sight. That's a biggie for us. And we learn through hearing. Those are the 2 we typically tap into. But we have to remember there's taste. So you could associate things with how they taste. Have your students take maybe an orange or some kind of food that they have easy access to and maybe taste something and then make an association through that. There's touch, of course, which we've been talking about with kinesthetic in particular. And of course, what's the other one? I did sight and hearing and smell and touch. Oh, I didn't do smell. I did taste and smell as well. Okay. So all of these, and by the way, they don't have to be real. They can be imagined. You could have your students imagining certain things and deepen the learning through that imagination. So you create, for example, you're telling a story. You can tell a story that's embedded with certain of these other senses, and they sort of associate it through the sense. They don't have to taste it in order to make the association, and that is how it's going to go in, and that's how they're going to retain it. So we could really use multiple levels of sense through intelligence, through vision and visualization and all of that to go really deep in the learning and to connect with all different types of learners. Have students, for example, instead of writing notes, maybe they create images or pictures of, their notes through picture form. Some students are gifted in that regard, and you can give them credit for doing that. Just a few examples as we go through this. Okay, we're going to focus primarily on these 3 because these are the ones that are more common in different students. So visual, again, is linguistic. We have auditory, and then we have, actually this one has visual and auditory as 2 separate ones. But I think earlier we combined them. Let me just confirm that I'm not making this up over here. So, no, we have visual separate from auditory. Okay, so we've got visual, how I see things, visual spatial. We've got auditory, which is the same as verbal and linguistic. And then we have tactile, which is bodily kinesthetic. All right, so now that we have that, let us move on. And let's unpack these in greater detail so that we can master these minimally. All right, when it comes to visual spatial, it's about visuals over sounds. When I see something, whether it's picture or text, I'm going to do better with it. All right. And I benefit from all of these techniques on the right side over here. So whether you're using your board or projector, you're using an outline, providing primary sources, having them close their eyes and visualize something, providing, of course, pictures and diagrams. All of these will help the visual spatial learner. And of course, graphic organizers are a big piece of that, as we will see. So I'm just going to leave this here for another moment so that you can see that. And then we were going to move forward still in visual spatial for now. Okay, so visual learners, we need to see it in order to know it. All right, Therese, I see you identify with that. That's great. They have a strong sense of color. They may be artistic. They may struggle if instructions are only spoken. So we have to be able to show as well as to hear. And by the way, in that VARC questionnaire that hopefully you will take, it asks questions like, if you're going to give somebody directions to the airport, how will you do it? And one example might be that you're going to write out the directions for them, or you might create a map for them, or you might physically take them there, or maybe you're going to make a picture of it, right? All of these, or you will show them, all of these are different modalities in action. All right, so lectures are hard for them. Words could be misinterpreted. The more that you layer your auditory with your visual, the better it's going to be. And minimally, you want to be checking for understanding to ensure that they actually get what you're telling them. Okay. Now, here are some more. I know that we're doing a lot with this, but there's just so much to be thinking about. Gestures, right? We talked in a previous one about using the teacher as a retrieval cue when it comes to memory, remembering information. That's also a visual learner at work, right? Pictures and videos, posters and slides, flowcharts, graphic organizers, you name it. All of these will help the visual learner to process, organize, and remember. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Otherwise, I will assume that we are able to move our conversation forward. In the interim, a very brief plug to graphic organizers. For those of you who were not part of my previous talk on active learning, even if you are, probably worthwhile reviewing quickly. Graphic organizers are a great way for thinkers to take their information and organize it, especially the visual thinkers, but really for every student. You know, Rick Lavoie, a well-known educator in the area of special ed, talks about that a rising tide raises all ships, and that special education is just good education. And sometimes we need to be thinking about all of our learners, but you could have a technique that may be specifically beneficial for one type of learner and actually help everybody, because all types of learners will benefit from having to take information that they heard orally, for example, and put it onto a graphic organizer in a way that demonstrates knowledge and the capacity to, whatever it might be, process it in any way that you're asking. All right, so you could use it at the beginning when you brainstorm. You could use it while you are teaching, when you're presenting findings. You could do it individually, in large groups, a lot of applications, and there are many, many different forms of it. Okay, it encourages students to think about the information in new ways. It's a great review tool, as well as demonstrating clarity, understanding, single snapshot, on and on and on. Bottom line is, it's great for visual learners and something that we should be incorporating often if we don't already. Here are just a few examples of it, like a main topic or idea on the top left in the spider map, branching out from bigger idea into details, ranking. What do I know? We did the KWL before. This is a variation of that. Moving forward just because of time, but please do take a look. There are so many graphic organizers out there, and you may want to Google graphic organizers for and offer a particular subject area and see what comes up, because there are so many teachers out there, thankfully, and many, many have chosen to share what they have prepared and what they have learned, and that makes it much easier for us when we're considering new ideas and new tools for our toolkit. Problem solution, compare and contrast with a Venn, all of these are valuable resources to consider. Okay, so one last piece on the graphic organizer side before we move on, just helping your students take notes. Here is a method you may want to consider. It's called the Cornell note-taking method. And in effect, it separates the main ideas from the details in the summary. And this allows you, as well as your students, to separate the big items from the lesser ones. It's not much different. I'm going to come back to it in a second, but just to show you a comparison, it's not much different than the top left over here, where we start with something bigger and then we branch out to the details. Okay, so the same basic concept of it, but it creates even more of a clear structure where everything belongs. And this way your students know what's the real big idea of this lesson and what are the details that either support it, define it, etc. And that would help you, by the way, with a 1-minute paper or some kind of exit ticket. When you want to ask your students for the main takeaways of the lesson, they'll be easily able to reference it because they'll know where to find it. And hopefully they organized it well in the first place. So this is an idea for you to consider, again, for yourself as well as for your students, a nice, neat way to put it up on the board, a nice, neat way for them to copy it and or to proactively complete it. So whether it's Cornell or graphic organizer or your conventional way, just make sure that they know what is really important over here and how do we organize it in a way that allows my students to process it, to retain it, and to retrieve it. Remember, we have to be thinking about long-term memory, long-term learning and retrieval so that they don't forget it a week after we teach it or a couple of days after the test, which unfortunately is the experience of so many of us. Okay, now that we've done the visual, let's talk about auditory, verbal, linguistic. We do a lot of this, so I don't think we need to spend a lot of time here. Sounds over visuals, information presented orally, lecturing, participating in groups, audio recordings or something similar, video, all of these are helpful for these kinds of learners. So I'm just going to jump right into the next one. I hope that that is okay. And bodily kinesthetic, this is an area where I think we probably could use a little bit more input. Thank you, by the way, Thomas, for your comment, Jamie, and everyone else. Even if I'm not reading them right now, I do see them and appreciate it. And hopefully others will see them as well. Okay, so physical activity to stimulate learning, hands-on activities, acting out, debates, and role play, these kinds of things. But even small stuff is okay. We talked about cooperative learning and think, pair, share and jigsaw. Those are all movements. Squeezing something, you know, swaying back and forth, maybe walking the back of the room for students that need that movement and that physical stimulation. All of them will be benefiting from the opportunity to move as they learn. Okay. Keep in mind, by the way, as I mentioned at the beginning, I would love everybody to be able to make applications here. I hope you have something in your mind that you are sharing. And by the way, some of you are still replying only to all panelists. Please adjust your settings so that you have all panelists and attendees. Okay. It could be Thomas. Yeah, there is something to say about, you know, standing up and moving around. That does help all students. It also helps just in general to have a break because, as you can imagine, when you attend a lecture or professional development training, you probably get, you know, antsy as well if you're not moving around. So I'm glad to hear that, Leanne, you got a lot of movement. That's the way to go. It helps all students, as we've talked about, so long as, of course, the emphasis is still on the learning, not just the movement, but I'm sure that's the case in your class. Now, there is Hebrew here. Please ignore that piece of it. I just want you to understand what this is. These are my students from many years ago. And we were talking about a concept in Jewish law. I'm not going to get into the specifics, but the idea was that we created a timeline, right? Time of day for, let's say, morning prayer, afternoon prayer, certain other things that were happening. And so we took the building was an older building. The tiles on the floor were 1 foot by 1 foot. So every tile represented half an hour. And literally we used masking tape to mark the floor and papers for the students to be holding, and each one got a different time slot according to a different opinion. And they literally created a human timeline using the same information that was visually presented on the board as it typically was. And we had fun with it. They really got a chance to figure out who goes first and who goes second and where do I fit. And it wasn't all neatly aligned. So in other words, sometimes it's on the quarter hour, this kind of thing. So they really had to think about it. So you're all sharing great ideas in the chat as well. This is great, right? How do I take regular, quote unquote, regular information, whether it's history-based with dates and times, or maybe a scientific process, you know, how long does it take for something to become moldy, or how long does it take for certain reproductive or other digestive or other processes to unfold, and then have your students create a physical manifestation of that with their movement and all, you know, all these things. Just kind of like let your creativity flow and ask yourself, how can I do more with the same things that I've been teaching this entire time? Okay, Sarah, I'm not sure why you're not seeing anybody else's responses. You can check your own settings there. You should be able to see everybody so long as they're replying to all panelists and attendees, but some people are still not, so please adjust accordingly. All right, other learning styles, we've already talked about this, so a brief review. The naturalist, who is nature smart, the interpersonal, who likes to talk to people, the logical mathematical, who loves math class and loves anything that is logical, legal, based on ideas, would love politics probably. Certainly if you are studying Talmudic or other related things which are very logic-based, that would not be in a conventional classroom, of course. Intrapersonal, we talked about this, of the self-smart, the person who's going to reflect on what does it mean to be a leader? What does it mean to be making a contribution? How can I solve a problem? And you give them space to do so privately. And then, of course, the musical. And by the way, I used to sing with my students all the time. I would, anything that had names and dates or lists, if you want to do the states of United States of America, or some kind of timeline, or the order of the presidents, or anything that may be difficult to memorize in particular, if you add music to it, create a song, it's usually going to benefit your students. And I'm glad to see that Teresa and others are doing that. So keep that feedback coming. So how can we help? We've already talked about this. So a lot of this may at this point be a little bit redundant, but we'll call it reinforcement. All right, so giving your students an outline, using a PowerPoint or visual aids or charts, anything visual will help your visual students. Of course, pictures will help as well. If you have auditory students, which everybody does, speaking, recordings, discussion, oral review, oral testing would be a great one. If you have your students and you can give them an oral test, it's not so simple from a logistical standpoint, but it can have tremendous benefit. Lots of your students will do a lot better if you would test them orally than if you just have them complete a test on a piece of paper or on a computer. Remember, you want to test as much as you can in the same method in which you taught it. So if the teaching is occurring through one modality, but the retrieval is occurring through a different modality, some students will suffer as a result. And so you want to be thinking about, how do I create opportunity for assessment that is consistent with the way that it was taught and feels most natural? And of course, formative assessment will give you tremendous opportunity to do that, but even summative or intermediate assessment can be done a little bit differently if you are creative about it, to allow you to assess your students differently. Kinesthetics, right? Create opportunities for hands-on activities and movement. Some teachers have great hand gestures or motions that allow them to teach things in certain ways. There's a rhythm to it and a whole movement. I lived in Atlanta for a few years. I'm forgetting the name of the school now. It's a decorated and awarded school. You probably know it's named after a person. I'm forgetting his name now. Some of you might know this. So if you do, go ahead and type it in. But they are well known for a lot of these kinds of things, using song and movement and all of that in their instruction, right? Sheets to complete. All right. Okay, let's keep moving here. Again, looking at the clock, want to be good on your time. We shared this idea before, the VARC questionnaire. I'm going to see if I can type it in again. Yeah, here it is. So for those of you who did not get it yet, I would encourage you to click on it and then take it afterwards, because you may have, in fact, I'll restate that, you definitely have personal interests and inclinations, personal preferences, and those without question color the way that you teach, because we all like to teach to our personal preferences. So own it. It's nothing bad. We all have it. But own it, recognize it, and then utilize an approach that allows you to compensate for it. At least be mindful that we don't overindulge in our personal preference at the expense of others. All right, we talked about this one, giving directions. How would you do it? Many other questions similar to this one. All right, now let's take a moment. We're not going to be able to do this very effectively using the chat, but I am hopeful that you are doing this in your respective space. You'll notice that this one only has 2, 4, 6, 7 of the 8 intelligences. Naturalist is not represented over here, but this is a lesson plan. You may even call it a unit plan if you want to go a little bit bigger with it and say, how am I creating opportunity in every lesson, or at least in every unit that I am teaching, that will ensure that I am meeting the needs of students with this particular affinity, this particular inclination or intelligence, so that I'm meeting that student's needs, and at the same time helping other students. And by the way, if you're into differentiation, which I hope all of you are, you know by definition that you could differentiate here as well. So offering students choice in how they want to complete their understanding or demonstrate their understanding of something. So for example, if there is an issue, let's say a North-South related issue leading up to the Civil War, you could have some students debate, You could have some students complete a graphic organizer. You could have some students create a visualization. You could have some students create a law or write an article in a newspaper. And all of these are teaching the same information, but doing so through different modalities and different preferences. So you're building in choice, you're building in variety, and you're also building in an opportunity for me as an individual learner to choose what will help me best manifest or demonstrate what I know, so that you, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. So long as you know that they know it, that's all that matters. And so we're allowing ourselves to go ahead and to do that. And if in fact you do have something where you're going to say, for example, I'm going to be teaching X and I'm going to use this technique to ensure that this kind of learner will benefit, feel free to write that into the chat. I know that's a mouthful, but go ahead and type that up if you would like to and share with us so that we can be learning from you and continue to share. Let's see what Thomas has over here. Transition remote learning, principal wrap. Nice. Okay. So you have a couple of wraps there. That's great. Now we want to go ahead and add more to it, or different modalities as well. Choice assignment. Thank you, Sarah. Good stuff, everybody. Keep them coming. All right. So the question, can we go ahead now that we have done this in the limited time that we have, but I think we did provide at least some preliminary foundational understanding of all of these. Can we list the 8 different intelligences and their definitions with accuracy? Think subliminal, right? Think of the different intelligences, and their spatial and bodily kinesthetic and linguistic. The M stands for musical. The I, interpersonal. The N is for naturalist. The A is for not auditory. Auditory. And then the last L would be for, would it be linguistic? There's an I in there. There's interpersonal, intrapersonal. Okay, we've done that. We've defined them. Have we provided at least a meaningful application per intelligence? Yes or no, please. If it's yes to both, write yes, yes. If it's yes and no, or no and yes, write that as well. Go ahead, please, and respond. Let me see where we feel we are in our learning. Okay, we've got lots of yeses to both. I almost feel like I don't want to do a yes wrap over here, but I think it's going to sound kind of redundant after a little while. So scrap that idea, but I'm glad that you feel that this has been useful to you in terms of your learning. So keep that coming. I do appreciate the feedback, Tiffany, and everybody else. Really, really appreciate all of your kind support, your love, your participation here. This is what gets me going in difficult times, and hopefully the same for all you guys. And anybody who is aspiring into leadership, or frankly just wants to be a better, strengthen your emotional intelligence and improve some of the softer side of leadership, whether that's communication and relationships, and kind of just understanding, that element, not just the technical knowledge of leadership, what your organization does, but specifically how to communicate it and lead people. Remember, teachers are leaders. So there's a lot about relationship building and all of that. That is my last pre-Passover webinar, and that is going to be tomorrow at the exact same time. Let me quickly share with you a couple of links so that you could access it without too much difficulty. Over here, I'm going to actually put everything into, let's see if I do this. This is going to be kind of crazy, but let's go ahead. Thank you for already registering. That is wonderful. I just shared a boatload of stuff. Let me review quickly what I sent, and let's see over here. So included in this is, number 1, the new webinars. That's the one I want you to click on for now if you're interested in registering. And by the way, next week, even though I will not be doing any webinars, I am hopeful to have new ones already shared or available on my website for the week after, if we are still here. And even if not, who knows, maybe even post-corona, we'll be able to keep doing this in some way to keep the community, keep the learning going. So definitely want to click on that. I would also like to add, if I can, that if you are interested in helping me continue to support my mission, which is keeping these offers free for any educator who wants to participate, there's an opportunity to support where it says in the chat, donate at. You can click there for a small donation. Everything is appreciated, as well as the opportunity, hopefully one day, whether you're on the East Coast, West, anywhere in between, Africa, you name it, I would love to be able to spend time with you in person, because that's, of course, where the real magic happens. So thank you all for indulging me on this slide over here. And I think that is it. Oh, I also included some goodies, even though they're not necessarily specific to our content, but a recent stress management ebook that I uploaded on my site is available at that link. If you want to become more productive, there's a blueprint, there's an assessment. So you've got tons of good free content available to you just because I love you all and I want to make sure that you get the very most that you possibly can during this time. And like I said at the beginning, we should continue to support one another, continue to learn from each other, and create opportunities for community and for engagement. And I'm going to just put the video back up for a moment to say goodbye like a normal human being and wave you all a wonderful day. Hope to see as many of you tomorrow as possible. And stay safe, stay healthy, continue doing the great work you're doing because you are what makes the world go round. And I look forward to engaging with you again soon. Have an awesome day, everyone, and we'll talk again shortly.